Hello, everybody, and welcome to ShowX on twitch.tv as you're watching us here. Happy to have you guys all on today. We're joined today. Oh, gosh, I have to change a few things up. It's amazing what happens when I don't pay attention before things, but joined, as always, by our good friend Ken. How goes, Ken?
Hey everybody, and hey Wayne, it's good to be here. I'm glad. I'm actually glad that after our spree of interesting shows with various guests and like people that we admire and find fascinating coming on and somewhat intimidating us with their impressive abilities and skills. It's nice to have a show where it's just you and I hanging out and chilling and not having to, I don't know, like think like to I'm not trying to strain my brain to make sure that I ask the right questions or anything. It's just chilling now. That's nice. I feel good about that. How are
Every
you,
once in a
sir?
while, it is nice to just kind of come back to our roots and have the lovely conversations that we have just between you and I. I agree.
For sure.
It is a nice moment to kind of come back and to get out there and kind of let everybody check in with us. And yes, so I will admit, I coming in after the last couple shows we've done, and now we've had little tweaks and differences each show. Same thing coming into this, where I forgot the tweaks that I had made between last show. And so yes, coming on when it initially had our friend John's social media tag up still, because we had to do some jostling of things last show to make it all look right. And I was up, I looked, I was like, that does not say Dr. Ken Reed. Let me fix that. At which point did. So, yeah, this is, admittedly, I was prepping 5 minutes before show because out and about doing other things, had a busy weekend, just got back home. But hey, we're live, we're here, we're on the air for you guys. So, welcome. So, yes, is going on.
Yeah, we're
No.
here. Here we are in not quite wave two, but kind of like wave 1.5 of COVID. Here we are, folks.
So, yeah, let's go ahead and kick things off there. We're going to kind of bounce back around and such, but we're going to start with a bit of, I think, if it will play. This will be a test to see what's going on. Oh, I know what's going on. Anyhow, of our dysfunctional deviations, where we're in here because, yes, we've had some challenges, I would say. For me to kick things off, I should, again, in approaches things, be going back to more regular scheduled work and things like that starting this week. Should. However, for my workplace, it's been very specifically tied to how well the numbers around cases and things like that have been happening in our area. And unfortunately, there has been in recent checking of things, upticks about things all around the country in the United States for numbers when it comes specific to the pandemic that is going on today. Ken, what do you got that you'd like to just kick us off with things with that?
Well, let me just say, first of all, that I'm looking at this from the viewpoint of Scotland versus here, right? That's kind of what I see. And the numbers right now in Scotland have been pretty great. If you look at the news these past few days, there have been no COVID deaths in Scotland for the third consecutive day. It was reported 4 hours ago.
Nice.
So things are going really well in Scotland. Admittedly, Scotland is a very small country, the population of which is approximately 5.5 million. There are some cities in the US that are bigger than Scotland in terms of people, right? So you got to take that with a big old pinch of salt. In fact, there's more people in London than there are in Scotland, right? But still, it is easier to control there and such. But it just shows that whatever Scotland has done, and in order to control the people going out and about and social distancing and wearing masks and such, we can see that there's clearly been a great effect in holding back the disease there. Same with New Zealand, right? We should, as a world, as mankind, we should be looking at the countries that are doing it right and learning from those countries what we should do, right? And then I look at the US. And today and yesterday, we've been breaking records across various states and various towns and various cities for having the most COVID cases, the most deaths and such suddenly. In particular, my parents actually messaged me yesterday and said, "Hey, your town's on international news." I was like, "Oh yeah, I can guess why." There's a bar here that I mentioned 2 weeks ago, by the way. I mentioned this at the time. It's called Harps, and it's Irish. I want to do the thing here. Irish pub. Um, that had an opening evening event where they totally social distanced and followed all the guidelines technically, right? So, for example, the tables were quite far apart. You had to wear masks when you're walking about, and I think there was only a certain number of people allowed in groups at a time. However, outside the pub, people were gathering in big groups, and there was a queue around the corner filled with people, none of whom were wearing masks, intermingling and chatting. So 3, 4 days ago, they said there's been 25 confirmed cases. I saw this morning there's now 86. 86 confirmed cases from one evening in a bar. One.
Yeah, I did see the report from that specific instance of what was happening with that one. And let alone, I think the United States showed an uptick recorded yesterday of 43,000 cases throughout, which was like the highest one-day increase that we've seen. I mean, pretty much, I think, worldwide. So
yeah,
there's a concern there. And if nothing else, because I don't know all the details and where all the numbers came from and what they're trying to tie it to, but in effect, the idea is it is still good because, as we talked about previously on our show, even that, you know, the virus never stopped happening and never went away, to continue to do, and I think it was John and I that had talked about before, better naming it instead of social distancing, but actual like physical distancing between people that you don't regularly associate with, such that you don't in some way perpetuate, pass on, continue the risk of this pandemic to other people. And in many ways, as much as people are dying for social interaction, because yes, we tend to be social creatures, that some of the best things we could do to help ourselves get to an even state where everybody is able to interact more normally again is to aggressively follow the guidelines today pressed out by by the WHO, by CDC, and everyone about how to mitigate the spread of this disease, and such that I am an advocate based on science that I have seen, and not the what I would say ill-informed opinions that some people have put out. For anyone who watched the video from Florida of individuals complaining to their local area about why they didn't feel like they should be wearing masks and such.
Can we show clips from that? Can we do that like legally?
I think an advertising thing, right? And we could talk if this is what we want to do about kind of the what does this mean to us and such. What kind of thing?
I'd enjoy just like mocking them openly here, because some of these people are just insane. Like there was one of the people who got up and she started off kind of okay. She was like, she started saying the point of how, you know, if some people die from wearing the masks, they don't get enough oxygen. First of all, that's complete bullshit.
The whole thing about the not getting enough oxygen from everything is such garbage.
Yeah, it's just
that people are using.
Yes, but you know what? If she wanted to say that people were dying from wearing masks, all right, present your case. You know, like maybe there's something I don't know of. I'm willing to hear, right? And then she went on, and then she clearly started to panic and just started babbling about, oh, it's because the reason there's 6 feet distance in between people is because they're training us to be like the military, where they're making us into military to get us ready for the face tracking and the 5G.
Oh my God.
And I was like, what?
Yeah, a lot of, I would argue, a lot of conspiracy theories have been attached to the valid concerns with this disease, which has allowed people to run with their speculations and concerns about what's happening. And thus, I don't know, I don't fully understand why conspiracy theories have become so attractive to people and why they want to perpetuate them. It's false, right? It's not based on reality, but sometimes I guess it either plays to people's fears, and thus they attach themselves to it. Because I would love if somebody has a background in kind of the psychology of humanity and how something like this catches on and passes forward. I would love to hear more about that, because I can only infer based on what I observe. And I don't know the reasoning behind, but I observe people seeming to latch on to some of these ideas that, to my mind, and based on what I have seen presented from factual sources from science and things like that, which I do trust, I've been given more proof that general scientific endeavors and places I go to provide accurate information, versus seeing people that are basing opinions on at best, what I can describe is things of belief that they are just wanting to choose into because of something they like about it. I don't know if I can frame it properly for the wise. So to share this in what little bit, I do not have this preemptively understood of what's going to be said. This is what I found real quick was from a news broadcast on WPTV Channel 5 NBC from that area, from Florida. And so I will see if I can play some of this. And let's see, that is what I need to do real quick is adjust where that's going to play and such that you guys can hear it too. And so I will bring in, let's see, put this on which channel?
Sure. While you get that going, I also saw Jedi's mentioned in the chat as well that he saw in the news that Scotland may be corona free by the end of the summer. And well, I think I'm hesitant to go with the phrase corona free because
Corona will
there's
continue
not
to
enough testing
exist
to prove it. Yeah, it's like one prove it, right? You need to test all 5.5 million to really say it's free. It's more like how we view the word extinct, which is doesn't mean all the animals are actually gone, all the plants are actually gone. It means that they're untraceable, right? There's a lot of extinct races that some species that just show up, right? That happens. It's because, like, especially if it's like a form of beetle or something. Thanks for our new follower, by the way. We'll drop a key in a moment.
happening now.
But it doesn't mean it's gone forever. And the same with coronavirus. It's not necessarily going to be gone forever, but corona-free in the sense that, life can return to something of normal, maybe. The problem is that there's still no herd immunity, so it needs to do a social distancing and other forms of safety and intentional prevention of infection needs to occur in Scotland to maintain that idea of free of coronavirus, right? It can't just be that way and then back to normal, sadly. Also, Jedi also said that my conspiracy theory is that China did this to raise the global economy market, and I responded to saying China sure screwed themselves then, because they're not benefiting right now.
I am disappointed in some of the conspiracy theories that somehow think the global pandemic is based on desires or focus specific to U.S. concerns about political stances. I have seen politics put into it saying that it is a false thing happening and it is only in the U.S. and it is done to some reach out from a global perspective solely to affect current U.S. politics. And I'm just kind of like, wow, in my own mind, because I don't know what it would take to coordinate something like that and to create such a global risk of willingness to sacrifice populations around the world just for some level of effect to the United States. That boggles my brain that people think that's true.
Yeah, I certainly think that the science is there. We could easily make a virus or refit one to meet certain criteria like infection or infection rates even or expression of disease, how it affects the people. But in reality, just because it can be done doesn't mean it is. I mean,
well,
it's the same
and let alone
they're not really going off all the time.
It's not even the designer drug thing, right? Or designer virus thing. It's that somehow it would be released around the world specifically to affect U.S. politics. That is such a leap of lack of reasoning. And it goes together about how people so often in the United States somehow visualize the United States as the only country in the world that matters.
Yeah, it's because it's a diversionary tactic, right? They did that to make them think, oh, it wasn't just us targeting the U.S. That'd be too obvious. But you know what? If they did, if I'm not saying it was, I really don't believe it is. But if this was created in a lab and it was made to target the U.S., man, the U.S. was ripe for it. You know that the U.S. was super ripe for it. I mean, look at where we are. Look at us compared to every other country in the world right now. America is doing terrible. It's because we're just unwilling and ignorant and intentionally choosing our freedoms over protecting ourselves. In fact, Ken Features was arguing with somebody on Reddit the other day, and I saw the thread, and man, I got mad. This guy, I'm guessing a student here or something, but he's here in East Lansing. He commented saying, "Oh, well, who cares? It's just a flu. It only kills old people."
That has been another fallacy that's been pressed heavily out there.
Not only is it a fallacy, But even if it did only kill the elderly, that's still horrible. Like, why would
Well,
that be okay?
it goes
Like,
into that discussion about people trying to claim certain things have more value than others, right? And yet they don't want to say it openly. The idea that a certain age group's lives should just be forfeit for the comfort of others. And I've seen that kind of displaced where then they have trouble trying to identify because, right, nobody ever wants to say, but my parents could be affected by this or my loved ones because they assume, no, it'll never happen to me. It's one of those unfortunate things that can be captured in memes. And a meme that I saw that made me think about kind of, and again, memes are a distillation of sometimes an idea or thought into a very specific example of it that is almost too convenient because it doesn't get the depth of the discussion, right? But it sometimes gets a point or feeling across. So some memes can be useful. Often memes can be a concern because they can too easily simplify a very complex situation. But one of the ones that I saw related to this was that the pandemic and racism are both very similar in that for many people, they don't exist until it happens to you.
Yep. And it's a problem. And this is actually a chat I've been having with a few people recently. It's this idea of people say, well, why is all this happening in your town, Ken? Why is it East Lansing that's having all these issues? I thought people were supposed to be smart there because they're students. And I've been saying to people like, look, man, like intelligence is something that's really hard to define, but psychologists have narrowed it down to several different fields. And I think it's all kind of common sense and when you hear the different types of intelligence. And one of the main types of intelligence that you develop over the years, some people get early, some people don't. Generally speaking, most people get in their teenage years. You don't get as a child. As a child, you learn to act certain ways for social benefit, but you don't actually gain the skill of empathy, right? That comes in your teenage years or later.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that's another.
And even once you get it, it's something that can be developed and increased and improved over time. And it gets to the point where your empathy can either be something that you only use on yourself, like how would I feel in the future? How would I feel later on? Then when you sort of develop it further, it goes to empathy of others. They're in your close vicinity. Like how would I feel if my family were affected by COVID? How would I feel if my friends were affected by COVID? And then it goes even further to my community, my school. Then it goes to like my town, then maybe my country. Then eventually, if you reach that sort of enlightened level of, trying to get how it would feel for like an African child, an Asian elderly person, somebody who's so completely distant from you, both physically and culturally and racially and sexually and whatever, right? Somebody who's on a completely different side of the various spectrums to you, and you can still empathize with them. That's a type of intelligence, right? And we're seeing that a lot with the people, with these young people, right? It's young people this week that are in the news for being the ones who are spreading it. They're the ones that are going to bars. They're the ones that are going to beaches, and it's because they have not gotten to that understanding of intelligence where they're book smart, they're academically intelligent, sure, but they don't have this level of empathy. They haven't learned it yet. And I really wish that COVID was a karmic force. That would be fantastic. It'd be great if the people who were the ones going out to beaches, going out to the bars, were the ones who suddenly got sick and learned from it, right? Not saying I wish they died. I don't wish.
Well, no, but that's one of the challenges, right?
Get ill and
one of the challenges is that because you can have whole groups of people, and the majority of the people I interact with seem to fall on the scale of people who are willing to, even if it is discomforting, it is a pain in the butt, it is whatever, a change to their norm, are willing to err on the side of caution that if I at least maintain these minimal levels of types of interactions with people, associations, distancing, wearing masks to prevent inhalation or expansion of the particulates that could carry a virus with it, and things like that to minimize the exposure of people randomly to the threat of this virus, that everything will be more manageable going forward. And that we won't get massive spikes that overrun medical facilities and capability to treat people and hopefully make people better. And that we won't suffer as much of the ability to send it worldwide or at least population-wide in our areas and keep it under some level of control. Because, eventually we need to hit to herd immunity and things like that. But there's this valuation that a lot of people don't want to discuss openly about, we want to open up things economically faster and therefore we're willing to risk killing off a lot of people who might otherwise be able to be treated, survive, or avoid exposure because they want to, because people are having difficulty understanding ways to move forward with this as a common reality. That they, instead of finding a way to live with the restrictions or the current accommodations we're doing, to instead try to throw that all out the window to just go back to what they were previously comfortable doing. It goes back to an idea of people. I like an idea that I've seen pushed throughout various media saying, I don't want to go back to the norm. I want to learn from what is happening to create a new norm, a new reality, a new way to live with these things that are now prevalent in our societies, such that we continue to progress and not just try to bury our heads in the sand and regress to some point that a majority of people were somehow comfortable. And so those are the issues that it's no, stop using this language. And this goes back to thank you again, John, for having the conversation with me about use of language and us going through how important the words you use are, because they provide actual meaning versus where a lot of people can misinterpret, because some people might use a tagline or a headline or something like that that sounds catchy, but isn't really providing the depth of the discussion. Again, the meme, the disadvantaged, destructive portion of the memes, right?
So there's I read in my philosophy 101 class back in undergrad. That was one of the first things one of the first chapters in my big tome of things I had to learn in that class. And the whole entire first chapter was these various philosophers who talk about the use of language, because before you discuss anything in the world that requires discussion and requires communication, you need to, of course, have language. And an understanding of language is an interesting thing. In fact, here's a great example. Yesterday, Ken Feature said to me that she loves that she married a guy who wears these nerdy anime t-shirts, is what she said. Okay. And I looked at her and said, I wouldn't say that I wear anime t-shirts. I have a couple that I got as gifts, and I wear them on special occasions, but my Dragon Ball Z ones, but I would never consider myself somebody who wears anime t-shirts. It's just not the way I see it. And she said, do you have a problem with the word geeky or nerdy or something? And I was like, no, I love those words. I actually see them just differently. So to me, the word geek, for example, means somebody who has a love of a hobby or more, right?
Yeah.
So somebody,
I think we have developed
tech,
we have developed through our show and interaction a similar definition of how we use the term geek. And I think some of that goes back to when geek started coming out as, when it's at one point was a negative term, at some points became a positive term, at some points got limited to a very specific kind of level of geekery. And I think you and I have come to an understanding that we believe geek is, like you said, a level of focused love, expression, and something for any subject. But that goes beyond just a general, I like this, to more of a, as we will use the term in itself in the definition, I geek out to this, right? I spend more effort and knowledge and love for this than I do a significant amount of other things. Yeah, continue. Sorry.
That's how I see the word geeky, right? It's hobby, generally speaking. And nerd is more an academic sort, right? So I would consider myself a nerd when it comes to computing. I literally, I'm a definition of an academic in that sense, right? So I definitely have to meet the criteria of nerd. So if you have a love for anything that's a hobby, it's sort of fun, is geek. If you have a love of something that's more academic, it's nerd. That's the way I see it. I don't see it either as derogatory terms. I don't see them as bad. I think there is a correlation with social anxiety. Generally speaking, you see the nerds and the geeks as being socially anxious bunch, and I see that amongst my colleagues. I see it amongst my friends. Right? We are generally speaking a socially anxious bunch. But that's just, it's just correlation, though. It's not a definitive thing, and not every single person in there is necessarily socially anxious. And nor is that necessarily a bad thing anyway, for various reasons. But my point is that use of language is entirely different. If I was walking down the street and somebody said to me, "You nerd," I would know that they mean that as you are a failure in life, you only care about obscure things, and you are not in the real world, and whatever else, right? I see it as a totally different thing. And that use of language is so key, is so important in philosophy and in anything. This basic understanding that we all have the same thing. Black Lives Matter is another great one, right? What Black Lives Matter means to yourself, Wayne, and what it means to me, or what it means to somebody who, for example, might try to express all lives matter, They're all very different things. It's the exact same terminology, the exact same phrasing, but they all mean very different things in the minds of those different people.
Yeah, it can be associated in ways that a lot of different people take or value differently. That is legitimately
For sure.
a challenge, right? Because that it is one that is being used commonly, and depending on who it's saying, can be taken. And actually, I had a really good discussion with this with Lemon Laser about how there are people, and I will absolutely agree to this, who may use the term "all lives matter" because to them, as just without any context to how the term "all lives matter" has come to popularity, see it as a genuinely good thought, an idea, right? That, well, yeah, I believe all lives matter. Why would anybody not believe that? Right. And so
5 years ago, I was of a similar opinion, right? I was uneducated and I thought, when people told me Black Lives Matter, I was in a bad echo chamber of the internet at the time. And when the people there were talking about Black Lives Matter and showing people rioting and showing Antifa as these people who are like really corrupt, and I was like, oh man, these people seem to be pretty evil, right? They seem to be pretty immoral. And then I learned more about it and realized, no way, I was wrong. You're right, absolutely right. It's an ignorance thing. And I think that's the problem, is that actually another discussion with somebody recently that was quite interesting about who's actually pro BLM, but who said to me, is the phrase Black Lives Matter just a really poor choice of phrasing for the name of the movement? Because it clearly sets these sides, opposite, because these people who don't understand and these people who do, and these people who are either racist or pretending not to understand, and those who are otherwise, right? And I said to them that, well, actually, I think it's a good thing that the movement encourages discussion. I think that's a good thing, because once you learn more about it, you've suddenly consumed media, you've consumed the news, you've consumed the history behind the movement, and then you understand more. And it's the same with any of this stuff, right? So anyway, back to the original point, which was language is a key thing in distinguishing what we mean by the various words. And it's tough, right? Because if you want, it's like, I think it was Carl Sagan who said, if you want to make an apple pie, first you must create the universe, right? And that's kind of taking it to an extreme, which is, we have some assumptions beforehand about any argument, that we understand what each of us are talking about, but often most people just don't understand, and they're getting caught up in the individual phrases instead of getting caught up in the actual meaning behind the words.
Okay. No, and that's where, at least for the specific, because yes, I in work and other things, I often try to perpetuate or put forward that one of the biggest challenges we run into is that we are challenged at times by the lexicon we all use, and how some are not accurate or are not shared between enough people, that we have nuances in how we define certain terms. And until you understand that those differences of definition exists, often you can't have a real discussion about a subject, because you're actually talking past each other, is common a phrase for, right? Because you are misinterpreting or misseeing an aspect of the discussion to each other, because you are saying one thing, they're hearing it, but applying a different bias or different thought to it, and thus misconstruing what you had a thought about. So I've had lots of discussions that required 15-20 minutes of pre-discussion to get to a common language before you could actually discuss what it was you're having, and trying to pause the conversation during, when those kind of things would come up during it, where I usually have an ability, thankfully, although it doesn't always apply well, to hear what multiple people are saying about a subject, and to realize when they're talking past each other, and to then provide that lexicon to both parties to say, you're talking about this and I hear it this way, but what you're hearing, it sounds like you're catching it this way, but here's the way I think both of you aren't interpreting this. And in doing so, it was able to allow better discussion, because everybody came together like, oh yeah, okay, no, now that we're talking about the same thing, I totally agree with you. And now we can actually make progress, right?
That's actually a fascinating point. And it reminds me of a conversation I had last night, actually, with my wife. So we were discussing the BLM movement. and as we do frequently, because we've got banners on our windows for BLM, right? Like we're the only flat in the block, the only apartment in like I don't know 5 dozen here that has anything on their windows. But because obviously whenever we look at the window, we see this stuff, so it's a common topic, right? Um, we're chatting about it, and Ken said to me like, "Oh, well, this just feels a lot like it's like the like 50, 70, 80 years ago in some regards, civil rights movement and such, and all the movements in between of trying to get equal rights, both in culture as well as in law." And I said, "Yeah, to an extent. I just don't think it's as big as those ones." And she like turned on me and was like, "What do you mean? Like, are you implying this isn't as important?" And I was like, "No, not at all. Actually, I would say it's just as important as those previous ones. But the problem is that we are in a completely different era than in that time period, right?" And she was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And she sort of went on the defensive because she thought that I was trying to imply that I was trying to belittle the movement, which is completely understandable, right? That she would try
Gotcha.
to defend it and be like,
Well,
"You're in the wrong, right?
when you
Obviously,
first
this is
hear
important."
something that's like stopping or diminishing that expression of like, but this is important, there's almost a
For
natural
sure.
response of defense and like, whoa. So yeah,
Yeah, and she turned around like 180 and looked at me. I was like, "What do you mean by that?" But thankfully she let me speak. Right, that's the thing that was really important. Is she then let me speak and explain what I meant. And my point was that it's the same stuff and it's just as important. But I then explained the story of what happened in Scotland with Margaret Thatcher and the bedroom tax. For those who don't understand and don't know the history of Scotland, understandably, with many listeners in the show not being in Scotland, basically, Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister of the UK 50, 40 years ago. And she, among many other things, used Scotland as a test bed for new policies. This is something that's been done many times in history, but because Scotland is a country and the United Kingdom is also a country, right? But in a confusing understanding, Scotland is part of the United Kingdom and is
yeah.
ruled by the United Kingdom, right? So even though they're technically both countries and technically separate countries, they're also the same country in a weird way. But anyway, so Scotland is ruled largely, especially at that time entirely, by the UK. So at that point, Margaret Thatcher brought in the bedroom tax, which basically meant that people who had additional bedrooms got taxed more, right? And that was dangerous precedent because if you inherited or okay, say your spouse died in the World War and you were left with this big house, and suddenly you don't have any income anymore, but at least you have this house, then suddenly you are being told you need to pay X amount of money per month for these bedrooms.
Sorry. Go ahead.
What am I hearing?
No, that was a bad thing coming through. I was prepping for something else. Continue.
Okay. I thought it was on my end.
No.
So the Margaret Thatcher went and implemented all these policies that were pretty bad, and most people, generally speaking, hated them. At the same time, or about the same time, she also closed all the coal mines, which, in over the long term, I think was a wise move. Believe it or not, that's just contrary to what many of my countrymen would agree with. But I don't think it was a good idea to leave the coal mines open. I think the technology isn't really there for us to do it safely. I think it's actually bad for our health right now, especially at that time. And I do think they should have been closed slowly. The problem is it was more like she just suddenly unemployed 6%, 10% of Scotland, right? And that was
That's
big,
significant. Yeah.
So one huge new tax, two suddenly, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of families were literally starving, right? These people were literally starving, and so they rioted.
No, that sounds like
Right.
oh, okay. I thought you would pause there, but it looks like the interwebs are hiccuping on us.
Sorry, you're lagging a little
Yeah,
bit.
no,
You're
we
coming
had
through
that
iffy
between us both.
Um,
So you had stopped right with they were literally starving, and then we had a hiccup.
okay, that's fine then. Yeah, they were literally starving, and people took to the streets and started rioting. And because of the rioting and the huge upheaval, Thatcher revoked the bedroom tax, and there's a lot of reparations of sorts put in place to help people. Not enough, right? But some was put in place because people stood up. Right. And the reason I brought that up is because if you look at the comparison to here in the US, it's a kind of similar situation where right now the COVID's hit, and we're seeing all this stuff with the police being, completely amoral. They're being just awful human beings and enforcing policies that are racist and systemic, and it's disgusting. Now, the difference is that back then, Scotland didn't have, for example, Greg's Chains and McDonald's and Lidl's and Aldi to, ensure that everybody could eat at a low price, even at least over a short period of time. And I'm not saying that McDonald's is good for you. I'm not saying Greg's is healthy. I'm not saying that. My point is that there was now, due to capitalism largely, there are options for the poorer classes to still be able to survive and eat, right? Additionally, we have luxuries that we never had back then. Pretty much everybody has a smartphone. Most people have some kind of gaming console or a big TV, and so on, right? You have access to the internet. And I'm not saying that there are no people in poverty. I'm not saying there are not people who are not starving, right? Of course there are. But my point is that in Scotland, in this time with Thatcher, it was starvation, and it was sudden, and it was a huge number of people. The problems we're seeing right now in the US are amongst those who are not starving, generally, and it's amongst those who are only a minor number of people are being affected, right? The amount of people that are getting killed by police is horrible and horrific and evil, but it's not 6% of the population. It's not 10% of the population. So the reason that we're not seeing this sudden change is because the whole country isn't rising up when it damn well should be, right? People should be getting to the streets. People should be standing up and shouting and saying, this is wrong. I'm not saying otherwise. My point is that because of the luxuries in place and because of the fact that people aren't starving, people are complacent. Gotcha. Right? People are getting so just like, I'm okay with this. It's not bothering me. It's not affecting me. I'm not trying to agree with them. I'm not trying to say they're right. I'm just observing what's happening. And it sickens me to the bone. I really do wish that people would get up and do something about it. But instead, people are complacent because they're happy with their McDonald's burgers. They're happy because they've got their TVs. They're happy because they have their AC. Even though they're brothers and cousins and people who are just a little bit out of their social distance in their social group, they can't see it, so they don't care.
Well, it's not even necessarily that
humanity, really.
Well, it's not even that they can't see it. It's that for me, and this is another discussion point I was having with Levin, is that there's a certain level of how much effort am I willing to provide from my initial needs outward. I classified it as a generalization of humanity as being selfish. She had some disagreement with me framing it that simply, but there is an essence that I think is natural. And maybe I think hers was more of it's humanity's natural state. And so let's start with accepting that versus calling it almost like it's abnormal to be selfish, but that I am most concerned with my personal health and well-being and those in my immediate circle, be it familiar or friend or physical location, right? And that as I start looking about the things that directly interact with myself and my immediate circle, and it start trying to expand that, what am I concerned with? What am I watching and witnessing and trying to affect myself further out to greater circles, greater things like your neighborhood, your general community, to at the largest sense, right, the entire universe, right? The whole human condition, the whole earth, the whole ecosystem, all these things, like how they all can interact with each other. That for most people, it is difficult to extend beyond my immediate range of concern and care and the amount of energy I'm willing to put forth as an individual to affect and participate in things around me, right? Because initially, I'm more than happy to participate in things that directly affect me, my family, things like that. But when you start going into the theories of, or this need to learn enough to understand how my actions or the actions of others can affect each other, it starts becoming more difficult for the average individual to put forth enough effort and care to try to work in such a way themselves or expect that effort from others to better work across all of humanity, right? Or society, or whatever group situation you're looking at. I was discussing with her some of the just things about the necessity, I believe, of like regulations and things in government, and how I believe government is a good place for that to exist because they have the teeth to affect change or to influence actual fines or ways to shut down entities that don't follow those kind of things. It's a discussion separate from this, but it talked about that human condition. And so I can see where it can be difficult for people to get as heated, as direct, as willing to participate in tough conversations about subjects that they themselves don't feel every day. And it's hard to say
Absolutely.
that it's good or bad for a person to be that way. I think there's a certain level of naturalness to it, and such that when I see conversations going out, I want people to try, if nothing else, to have a wider perspective such that they
For
can
sure.
see how these things affect. Because yes, when you talk about like your discussions with Kitten Feature specifically about Black Lives Matter, I've heard a lot of perspectives, everything from the organization that has attached itself to the name Black Lives Matter, separate to a degree from the intent of the movement of Black Lives Matter,
Yes.
potentially has some negative things with the people that specifically claim an organization around Black Lives Matter. I've heard things to even suggest that they have viewpoints that are focused on other ideologies that are not conducive to like the current American standard of government and things like that, that are actually very against. And so if you focus on the actions and what those individuals are trying to do, I think there's some legitimate
Mhm.
criticism there. When you talk about the generalization of the movement of Black Lives Matter, of trying to create awareness to the population of very specific social things that have occurred, legal things that have occurred throughout the history of the United States of America, and how it disproportionately negatively affects people of color because of
Yep.
them, that is a whole nother piece of the focus of saying Black Lives Matters, because people of color still are suffering through these systematic issues about how races are interacted with based on, we have examples right now. The police brutality is a big one that is a focus and in front of people, because we get more visibility today in very specific examples of where police officers are, to a greater degree, percentage wise, affecting people of color more aggressively than they do white people. And
Yeah.
we then, if you want to extend it to the whole system, you look at how the legal system treats people of color, how disproportionately, and I use that word because yes, there is arguments of numbers, raw numbers. When you realize there are more white people in the entire system than people of color, yes, you will likely have higher numbers of white people affected by just numbers. But when you look at the percentages of that population and you start getting to, of the whatever race or group is being affected, and you have 6 times the number of black people being arrested for the same crime as white people, when it comes to white people existing at 2 to 3 times the population of black people, then you can start seeing a reason this is a bigger concern. It's showing a hyper effect, or the way the system is attacking one specific group to a greater degree than another. And so that's part of where that
And I think
discussion point comes.
I think you've hit a really key point there, which is a lot of people don't understand the stats, right? I mean, that's a hard thing to understand. Okay, the kind of people that we see that are saying all lives matter tend to be, and this is a generalization, so I would not. I know that not everybody is. I know some are college educated, some are black, some are Mexican, some are male, some are female, right? I get that, but generally speaking, the people I see who are standing up and saying all lives matter, they tend to say that because they don't understand. It's
Well,
ignorance, right? They literally do
this
not
is where
understand the statistics behind
I
uh, Black Lives
I will
Matter.
specifically say that when judging and evaluating a situation where someone has used a term like all lives matter, if it is being used as a counterpoint or a way to take away from the term Black Lives Matter, I would personally discuss or try to bring up the effect that, why do you feel the necessity to bring that up in response to this, versus the term all lives matter being used consistently all the time on all issues, versus being brought to rise in response to the term Black Lives Matters being used. And that I think that context is important, because someone who just
Very.
openly by itself says, I believe all lives matter and it's important and everybody should have access, I'd be like, you know what? I agree with you. If a person says, I don't think you should be using the term Black Lives Matter, and instead use all lives matter, or simply states all lives matter in direct response to Black Lives Matter, then I think there's a potential issue there, and you can start looking at that context, because that's one of the challenges. And there's more snarky ways to have that discussion or argument, saying that for those people, because I'm trying to avoid the generalization, like you said, Ken, of a group of people being a certain way. There are individuals who show examples of behavior that do tend to lead to a group definition, but I still want to try to get people to focus on the individuals. That's something I was called out for, about the convenience of too easily grouping something. It's like saying all police are a certain thing. That's not true.
Yeah.
But you can caveat or say additional to it to say police officers who are complicit in the activities of other police officers doing illegal things and don't speak out about it, don't turn in their own officers they see doing bad things, are a part of the problem because they are complicit. Same thing with racism things. You know, there's a challenge to the things of like complacency, but I don't want to group them all as saying all almost anything, right? So for those people who do respond in a situation of like calling out against the term Black Lives Matter as a generalization of a term and a generalization of a movement, I think that is a concern. Now, I do want to take this back because we had queued it up and kind of back to previous to that discussion, although I appreciate, like you said, your own, how you're having those continued discussions. And really, I think that's one of the best things that can happen right now is a continuation of discussions.
Sure. Yeah.
I like that people are trying to learn, engage, and find out more about the subjects at hand. Please do. I've had that conversation, unfortunately, in some where it can be exhausting as a person who feels like they see the situation, to feel like they are constantly trying to educate people who may not be open enough to doing it themselves, because that can get tiresome to be like, why am I having to take on a role of an advocate against people who should be old enough as adults to take it upon themselves to do research and to learn? It's tough, but maybe it's worth it because that's what leads to the better discussion. And in some cases, I say, if you find people that show the signs they're willing to discuss and learn and do more, then engage with them. But it's a focus, and this is again where I've been challenged, of where do I put forth that effort? Am I actually having conversations with people that it's productive, or am I just starting arguments and yelling? And I have suffered that some, because I've realized there are people that don't want to learn, don't want to have anything different, and therefore me spending energy trying to show them additional resources to react to hasn't helped, as well as trying to keep myself from falling victim or into the same pattern where I consume so much of the same media that I start getting, because I actually did. And it represented itself in the last show where I got angry and I got to a point where I was conflating and starting to push further past just the straight facts of the discussion to coming from a place of how it made me feel and how I was witnessing things versus the actual facts behind. And not to say that what I said wasn't based on some truth and realities there, but I have to myself be careful not to fall into that comfortable, convenient trap of letting it just get emotional and therefore losing reason. Right.
Yeah. So, your emotions are very useful in an argument because they are fuel, right? They fuel your mind into
but
actually arguing in the first place.
Channel them to fuel you to look up your facts, develop a informed opinion, and find an ability to share that opinion that doesn't require the expression of emotion in order to get it out and be shared with others. Because unfortunately, emotion can lead to dismantling of actual conversation and leading towards just fighting, just arguing, just yelling, where actual communication breaks down. And so there's a challenge there.
If you're debating with an expert debater and you get angry, you've lost, right? Even if they're racist, you're right.
And that's something where I am free to admit that I fell victim to, and working right now to improve, that I should not consume so much of social media that I feel anger. And I should not feel that I need to respond to some of the ignorance I see professed by others without it being a very specific level of, like I've said, an engagement in conversation versus a, haha, I got you with this thing that proves you're wrong, right? It needs to be really engaging in active conversation that isn't attacking the person, but is with somebody who's going to have an opportunity to learn, and that you allow an opportunity for them to share where their basis is, to find out if there's commonality or if there's something you've both missed, right? It needs to be a potential growth for everyone.
You've totally got that right. And there's something that, as you know, I'm not religious, right? In fact, I'm kind of anti-religious. I find religion to be, generally speaking, an awful construction. However, I'm also wise enough to realize that there's a lot of wisdom to be learned from the writings of old that have been passed down for generations. There's a reason they get passed down, right? And one of the things that I learned from reading the Bible is something that over the years, I used to think was really dumb, and I've come to realize that is so completely true, and it's just not obvious, which is love thy enemy. Right?
Mhm.
When you are talking to somebody who is a racist, if you scream in their face and call them racist, and you get mad and you explain why they're wrong to their face, you know what they're going to do? They're going to just buckle down and be in that position
Yeah, the
more.
initial
What you need
response
to
is I have to defend myself, and therefore it shuts down.
exactly. What you need to do instead is like buy them a cup of coffee, sit down and listen to them and hear their viewpoints, and then explain to them your viewpoints and talk to them frequently and openly about it. As Mika Sorona mentioned in the chat, right? Mika Sorona said that she sat down with her mum and this last week and had a discussion about why is Black Lives Matter, not all lives matter. Her heart was in the right place, which is often, I think, the case with many people who are all lives matter protesters, right? A lot of them genuinely have been convinced by, you know, generally speaking, malicious forces in the media who are trying to convince you that that you know black people are out to get extra rights and that they just want to riot and loot and steal things, right?
Yes.
And these people genuinely just believe that because that's what they've been shown videos of and photos of, and they've been told this narrative, and they genuinely have been starting to be convinced this is a sect of people who happen to be a different skin color, but are seem to be destroying what they love and believe in, right? That's how they see it. So you can call them ignorant, you can call them fools, whatever, amongst your friends, I guess. But you need to talk to them and sit down and be like, look, we are actually good people, and we don't want people to you know destroy property or whatever either. The reason that this is happening is because, and then you know actually explain it. Don't just assume that they are just racist assholes. Don't you've already failed to convince them, because if you call somebody an asshole, they're not going to be like, yes, I agree with you. You know, you got to actually sit down with compassion, with love, and explain to them truly what it is. Right? Hug them. hug your enemy. If you can do that, that says a lot about you as a person. And even if you don't convince them, at least you did the right thing, right? And you've shown that you are not the caricature of what they think of your movement, right? You can instead be compassionate and kind. And if you can do that, you will be much closer to convincing them than if you just, you know, shout in their face.
I agree. No, I do agree. And so I think what you're going to hear, or what you are hearing from us, is a sense of discussing things with a level of compassion for everyone. And it's tough because sometimes the people you're trying to have the conversation with are in a place that makes it very difficult to come in with that nice feel. But I would also say, if you're focusing your energy on people that you care about and you believe you have some level of connection to beyond just, I know who you are, start there. Start with people that you think, you know, value you, your thoughts and stuff like that. And you can have that conversation. All right. I want to pull back a little bit because we were talking specifically about the pandemic things and the case in Florida, right? Of what was happening and kind of the words being stated by a group of people that concern me, I believe concern you, Ken, about the kind of information they have consumed and have built beliefs off of, and thus what they exposed or expressed in this town hall meeting in Florida about reasons they specifically wanted to ensure that the local government did not enforce mask wearing anywhere in their area. And so you had some strong viewpoints come out. And I don't know, like I said, if this video is going to present itself with commentary with it as well, because it was a news broadcast. I fast forwarded a bit to where it's showing the video. So hopefully we'll get some of that. Ken, you'll hear it right along with. But this is, again, I said, a thing from WPTV from number 5, channel 5 in Florida, posted a few days back about this, essentially this protest or this kind of expression to the town hall of people's concerns with wearing masks. So we'll consume some of this and talk about it. And so here's from the broadcast.
You literally cannot mandate somebody to wear a mask knowing that that mask is killing people.
As impassioned residents vehemently oppose requiring masks to be worn in the county to combat the coronavirus.
This is a planned demic. This is totally political and you know it.
You disgrace me!
You know why? You did not listen to we the people. You made your decision.
An unrelenting crowd waving its hands and disagreeing with the director of the Palm Beach County Health Department, who states cases are climbing in Palm Beach County.
That motion passes 7-0.
But after more than 3 hours of heated public comment, commissioners voted unanimously to mandate masks in businesses and public places.
I think this is going to be the most effective pivot point in changing our course and suppressing the spread of coronavirus, and we need to see how this works first before we go deeper into our economy reopening.
Palm Beach County Mayor Dave Kerner says he spoke with Governor Ron DeSantis Monday.
All right, so with that, and I know there are other examples out there. I was trying to look through because it's been distilled in some ways. There's several examples of very specific responses coming from people about their anger, their distrust, their concerns. You heard just a very snippet of it. And unfortunately, I think where it's been shared most raw has been on social media. And yet I didn't want to necessarily go to that as a source. And like I'll try another one here. This is one from, and I will admit I'm a little concerned to reach to this one because this was one from The View as an option.
Okay.
And so they always have commentary, but some more of like that same gal who initially started coming out. And I've heard some of this in myself, so we'll see what else this comes up with.
Citizens arrest is because citizens arrests are already happening, okay? And every single one of you that are obeying the devil's laws are going to be arrested.
They want to throw God's wonderful breathing system out the door. You're all turning your backs on it.
And ma'am, as a doctor, I really have many question marks about your degrees and what you really know, because what you say is the political dogma that they're trying to shove down our throats on every commercial and every store, and it's disgusting.
Well, okay.
So like I said, there's that challenge of them saying just, again, these are just like snippets from what some of it is. And unfortunately, like I said, I think the rest of that is just them having conversation about it. But examples of the kind of words, the kind of things they were saying. And yeah, you're hearing the reaction. You're seeing in this where it's discussions like words being said about religion being brought into it. That is
Madness,
something
by the way.
I have seen that.
You know, like 99.9% of Christians in the world don't believe in the devil. That is such an American thing. Like, it's literally just America. The devil is not something that exists in the Christian faith elsewhere. It's some weird thing that, for some reason, here is seen as like a literal thing. It's crazy.
I can't speak to what a lot of religious views are from around the world. I definitely have heard examples of people using specifically religion as one of their go-tos for evidence or for support of why they have made the decision they have for how they're going to react to something. I admittedly unfriended someone because they were essentially using that same argument of not wearing a mask because they believed this was a religious endgame issue, that instead of us trying to use a reaction of science to how to work with one of these things, that, oh, that's terrible. That you
Feel
have,
free to share that as well.
Yeah, that you have instead people using that as a means to, like, I don't know. I've just seen things coming in with people using to perpetuate their opinion. And because that gal in one of the clips I'd like to find from her, the one in the red shirt, specifically spoke to, like, from when I watched it, all this religious based stuff saying that saying that you don't believe scientists, believe God kind of reaction thing. It just, to me, hurt my brain for logic. Ken then shares this example of someone who, I guess, take this in whatever context you'd like, but an example of someone on a plane, on a flight, assume what you will about wearing the mask and hat. And I mean, it's almost like an overly convenient association to make when you see someone wearing a Make America Great Again hat, and then them performing something that makes you see that they are not, for whatever reason, following some of the logic and things that are out there. In this case, wearing the mask that is meant to prevent you from breathing in and out particulates, and thus minimizing your exposure or exposing others to potential disease, over his eyes as a blindfold to minimize light and sleep on a plane, which is just kind of
It just shows the willful blindness. I think it's just almost poetic and artistic. It's just a metaphor for these people, right? They're willfully ignorant. They choose to cover their eyes to the truth and expose their mouths to the disease instead. I also just to give credit to the person who posted that originally. To Cassandra of Troy on Twitter at Bryn Tannehill. That's BrynNTanne Hill HILL. On Twitter. And she also said, I don't think anything I've seen so perfectly captures why there's no way the US is going to be getting on top of COVID-19 pandemic anytime soon. Yes.
No, there's just so much with that. It's a real challenge for me. Because again, I have concerns, and there's a lot of, again, memes that capture the idea of that it's just like, in ways I want to say, how hard is it to follow the recommendation and what's out there, right? Is it such, I don't understand the rhetoric, the concern, the way it's being expressed of people saying that somehow these things are infringing on rights. Because one of the challenges, right, one of the things I think that was mischaracterized in that town hall is that nobody is saying that you have to wear a mask 24 hours a day in everything you do. What it is stating is that the recommendation from all of it is wearing a mask in public when you cannot physically distance and thus are potentially going to be sharing breathing with other people. And that and so I've seen that misconstrued a lot, the whole purpose of mask wearing and where and how. And that what they're basically stating is businesses can absolutely deny you service in the same way they can deny you service and have been for as far back as I remember personally in my lifetime for not adhering to their policies of the store, like no shoes, no shirt, no service, which has been around as far as I can recall in business, that if you try to go in and not wear a shirt in certain establishments, they are completely within their realm and rights to say, get out. In the same way, if someone has a policy posted that says you must wear a mask in our store and you choose not to, they are within their rights to deny you service. Because these are all privately owned and maintained businesses, services, things like that. And I'm sorry, but if you are a proponent of freedom, and actually I have an anecdote to go with this. And for those who are in for the title of Geek and Tech, we'll get to some of that, but this is prevalent now. If you believe in freedom, individual freedom, then you should also believe in the freedom of someone who owns a business and things like that. And in doing so, that they have the right in their freedom to exercise who they do and don't want to be a part of their business, to be associated with them. And so you feel free with that freedom. So an example I wanted to bring up, sorry, I was distracted for a moment, is that a friend of mine on social media recounted a story, and it was still a bit of disbelief for me to hear this happening, that they were in a large big box store, I will give name for it, to a Walmart. And my friend was wearing their mask as is appropriate. And in doing so was recounting having received glares and kind of those kind of negative reactions to wearing the mask by people in the area who weren't. And having a lady come up to her and specifically call her out and say, "Why are you wearing that?" And I will paraphrase to a degree, "Don't you know that's no longer a thing? And it doesn't matter. You shouldn't wear that." And then what really took it to an extreme was that lady then attempted to physically remove the mask from my friend.
That's assault.
Like reached
That
up
is
to
assault.
pull. My friend recounted having a strong reaction to this and verbalized it in ways that I don't think I would have been able to or comfortable doing, but essentially called them out, called her out saying, "I'm sorry, but when I get treated like this, I'm usually paid X amount per hour for those kind of services," essentially equating the interaction to that of a sex worker. with the purpose of making that person uncomfortable, and absolutely worked. And equally had someone then in line for checkout stand right behind them. And my friend responded in kind with a very kind of aggressive response, but saying essentially, hey, normally when I'm being ridden that hard from behind, I like to have my hair pulled. And how that made the person so uncomfortable, they stepped back. But it was crazy to me that it seemed like it was a necessity for them to react or provide such a uncomfortable situation for people, for them to actually act like human beings, right? Because in that thing you said, Ken, about assault, how dare someone claim that their desire to not wear a mask is based on freedom, to then openly infringe on someone else's freedom to wear whatever the hell they want?
No, I'm sorry, but somebody touching your face. Never mind the fact it's a pandemic. Like that just makes it particularly...
Just in general, right? In general.
Yeah, but it's somebody touching you against your will. You're allowed to, in my opinion...
Oh, we had another hiccup for a moment there. Sorry, we had another hiccup. In your opinion...
All right. In my opinion, if somebody touches my face without my, say-so, that is an assault, and I will react in that regard. I'll either try to defend myself and or call the police, because that's what you do when you're assaulted. Because especially here, I'm a particularly wary of people who are ignorant with COVID, and I'm also wary of the fact that people have weaponry. So, I wouldn't want to start a fight or anything, but if somebody touches my face, yeah, I'll definitely call the police. And, if I think they have malicious intent, I'll certainly want to defend myself. But yeah, if it was just some old lady in a supermarket who was trying to touch my face because of a mask, I wouldn't hit them, of course. That's just unnecessary. I would certainly call the police and smack their hand away. I think that's fair.
But that's the thing, right? It boggles my brain how people can profess one thing, but in a way, I do see a lot of people who are writing under this kind of banner of their own idea. One of the conversations point I had with Lemon, with Lemon was very specifically how people interpret freedom, especially in the United States of America, how we have almost tried to create our own ownership and hyper realization of what freedom can mean, where we all, at the same time that people in the US claim freedom, they're at the same time binding that into their own definition that is in reality constrained to their version of freedom, not actual freedom for all. And so there's a challenge there when you start trying to have the conversation. And so it sucks, and it sucks. It's like such a thing to have there. What do I want to put I think is this specifically? Nope, unfortunately, maybe not. I was trying to see if I had found the original video that had more of those conversations. Instead, I'm seeing other videos that have additional fights going on around it. Oh well, shucks. I was hoping to get very specifics to the meme. Oh wait, maybe. I think I might have found it. Can I share that is more just... Yes, this is it. All right, so you guys are going to get it one more time for the this is what people, or the one that went around social media primarily, for the concern of what is happening with all this. So I'm going to share this one. Feel free to continue the conversation because this has been...
wear a mask for the same reason I don't wear underwear. Things gotta breathe.
This has been put together, being that this is now this,
and they
that
want
it
to throw God's
sends a certain message.
Wonderful breathing system out the door. You're all turning your backs on it.
In the beginning, God formed man out of the earth and breathed his breath in him, and he became a living soul. Where do you derive the authority to regulate human breathing? What you say is the political dogma that they're trying to shove down our throats on every commercial, in every store, and it's disgusting.
Every single one of you that are obeying the devil's laws are going to be arrested. And you doctor are going to be arrested for crimes against humanity.
Let me ask you all, do you believe you're God? Do you believe you can override God's divine plan for our lives? You're removing our freedoms and stomping on our constitutional
I am
rights
concerned with people who
communist
invoke
dictatorship orders or laws
God
you
is
wanna
their
mandate.
answer.
We will get together and do a citizen's arrest on every single human being that goes against the freedom of choice, okay? You literally cannot mandate somebody to wear a mask knowing that that mask is killing people. It literally is killing people.
Now, this was presented from Now This as a way to also counter what they see as
every single
conspiracy.
one of you have a smirk behind that little mask, but every single one of you are going to get punished by God. You cannot escape God. You cannot escape God. I'm gonna say that again. You cannot escape God, not even with the mask or 6 feet. Okay? 6 feet, like I said before, is military protocol. You're trying to get the people to train them so when the cameras, the 5G comes out, what? They're gonna scan everybody. We gotta get scanned, we gotta get temperatured. The kids have to go to school with masks. Are you insane? Are you crazy? I think all of you should be in a psych ward right the heck now.
Much of our communication is nonverbal, which includes facial expressions, gestures displayed, and the physical distance between the communicators. How will young children be able to know who the dangerous deviants are, like pedophiles and people in the human sex trafficking?
You did not listen to we the people. I would die for that country. I would die for the Constitution. And you know what? You disgrace me. You know why? You did not listen to we the people. You made your decision.
I haven't worn a mask yet. I'm not wearing it today. Besides, despite what you guys do up here today, I'm not wearing one tomorrow. I was born free. I will stay free. My rights come from God, not from you. I'm not wearing it. You're going to have to hold me down and put it on me.
We are a nation of shared values of freedom, liberty, equality. We are home of the free, land of the brave. This is America, as someone else spoke. This is not Cuba. We are not in a communist nation.
So, yeah, it's... And
I say Trump 2020, and I hope every one of you gets voted out who votes for a mask here today. Shame on you for voting for a mask.
Thank you, ma'am. Your time has expired.
I also heard you say this is a democracy, and I'm sick and tired of hearing you say that. It's a republic.
I'll give it to her on that one. I will actually give it to her because, yes, the United States is a republic. So I will actually, I will actually give that to her in that sense because, yes. But I wanted to share that was the one that went around. Again, now this is providing it from a perspective where they themselves are trying to essentially present it in such a way that does throw shade on the group that are presenting that. Now, so I will admit that was a biased depiction, but you did hear from their own mouths some of the reasons, ideas, whatever beliefs they have as to what they were trying to support their argument of not allowing, and this is the crazy part, right? Allowing businesses, public displays of places and stuff to require masks when you have gatherings of such. That's the part. They are, I believe, misconstruing the issue to try to think that you have to wear a mask 24/7 in some way. And that is not accurate based on what the actual laws are. But I wanted everybody to hear that from their own, from the people who presented its mouths, and so that you can form your own opinions onto whether they have valid points, or if nothing else, from my perspective, is to understand that people are using thoughts like that to justify their actions. And unfortunately, that may extend beyond Florida, and you may have people with similar reasoning or mindsets or whatever interacting with you in public today. I still have seen in my own experiences going to the store, people who, unfortunately, I feel like I could classify fairly easily into a group, not wearing masks in public spaces and stores and things like that. I try to avoid them with a wide berth, and I will, even to a point, make it obvious. Like, whoa, nope, steering clear of you because you are potentially risking me. I don't know who you are, where you've been, what you've been breathing. I don't know. So I'm going to not risk that. I would like to maintain who I interact with in a very discreet and controlled way. And there's challenges, even speaking about some of my interactions, what I did just recently, yesterday, going climbing and doing stuff, that there are challenges with maintaining it, but it's giving that best effort and trying to do what I can to minimize, again, exposure in most ways. I struggled with it yesterday and I didn't succeed completely, but I'll get into that with, I discussed kind of like what I was doing. But hopefully for everyone out here, feel free to challenge us, Ken and I, and how we're thinking, because we are also willing to have that conversation. And if we're missing something, some key fact, some piece of information out there that might help us in better formulating the overall discussion, we'd like to see it. We'd like to hear back from you and understand it.
For sure. Also, I'd like to comment on some of the things that was just quoted from those people. One of the things they mentioned is "We are the land of the free," and I know it's a quote. The person I'm quoting was quoting.
Land of the free, home of the brave. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, like, so there's a great speech that I found on YouTube years ago, and they came to mind. I just found the quote. It's from the Newsroom. Is the show's called, and one of the panelists on the show is asked, "Can you say why America is the greatest country in the world?"
Oh yeah, that's a famous quote.
Yeah, I love
this
show.
And
and the guy
essentially comes out and says it's not, and gives various reasons as to why it's not number one in the world. It's a very strong, I believe, expression.
Well, it goes into some very extreme particulars. I won't say the whole quote because it is quite long, but in particular, I'll mention that at the time, which I think was like 2012, it said, "We are 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, number 4 in labor force, number 4 in exports. We lead the world only in 3 categories: number of incarcerated citizens per capita, number of adults who believe angels are real, and defense spending." Right. I mean, that's like, I really like America. I like being here. I moved here intentionally. I chose to come here. I think that America is a land filled with so much potential. I think it's incredible. I think what America could be is amazing. And I think that Trump actually was very smart with his campaign slogan, because I think a lot of people recognize that America could be amazing. It could be a world leader in all the things I mentioned beforehand. It easily could be. It has it has enough money, and it has the belief behind it. And I think if maneuvered politically correctly enough, America really could be amazing and a leader of the world. Truly, it's not right now, and I don't think many Americans would disagree with me in the fact that it's not, the best country in the world.
Well,
I don't
it's
think
a challenge, right?
Can
because
be a best country anyway.
It is a challenge because it is part of how, like I said, the U.S. likes to present ideals like patriotism, like freedom, like the way that Americans and specifically, I'm careful here because I say Americans because it's convenient and easy. I try to say United States of America because America consists of North and South America, and there's a whole lot of various countries in it. And it is cheap for me to say Americans because that is not accurate. I'm sure Copy would agree. And so in the United States, it's amazing how we have, in my opinion, perverted some of these basic concepts of words into these kind of discussion points. And I think there's more to it than what we're seeing, which is one of the things that I struggle with it. Yeah, gosh, it's tough, but it's one of those things that because of that twisting, we overload so many things when trying to have that conversation in the United States. And so when you're like land of the free, right? Again, that goes right back to what do you define as freedom? And how it's overemphasized or overloaded compared to what people academically might describe as freedom, because people add their bias to it. It's a struggle. It's a struggle in this time to have that conversation.
Absolutely. But my point is just that these people are going from the viewpoint of we're already the best, why change? And it's just a point of pure ignorance. I don't think anybody, even in the best country in the world, okay, imagine for a moment that America really was the best in everything. It's not healthy to believe that. It's much healthier to believe that there's room to improve.
Yes.
Right.
That we could always be improving.
Yeah. And every person on earth should have that belief that they're in that they have done their hardest and tried their hardest and should continue to try and try harder, right? That's the bit that that's the only way to be truly productive and to give back to mankind. Is not to have the viewpoint that you are the best, or we are the best, or our country's the best, or town or team or whatever is the best. It's that we can improve, right? All right, with all that stuff, I think you're right. We should move on from COVID. It's been an hour 20.
Yeah, but and sometimes, like you said, as we're getting back to things, just chatting, there's there. Attached with, so not directed to COVID, I wanted to bring up some of the kind of the lighthearted and hopefully positive views of some of the things that have been happening around what we've been doing. I wanted to give some time to some articles. So I will very briefly share things that I've been doing, just brief. And my briefness that I will bring up is to say that I have been staying active this last week, and it's almost been to a hyper level in that Lemon Laser and I have done, like, I did yoga. What was it? Monday, I think it was. Then went running on Tuesday, and then did yoga again on Friday. And the yoga I'm doing is a heated yoga. It is a level of where people are normally experienced doing it. I am basically playing holy crap, see if I can keep up yoga, in that the yogi instructing are basically saying, like, do this, hold this, now do this, and transition to, and I'm having to, like, turn and watch what that means in some cases. I've gotten a few down. Like, I got downward dog, right? But there's a few that I'm still trying to figure out, like, oh, wait, this is new. I haven't heard this one before. See it and, like, okay, what's that look like? And watching Lemon do it, watch other people around me, and kind of like, so I got to, like, twist this, do that, all this, and hold on one foot. Yeah, got it. Yeah, I'll do that. I've had some struggles. Yeah, when I went on Friday, I started to basically fall over and do things like that, but working it. So trying. But then, and it was a risk involved with the Friday yoga to see whether it affected me yesterday. But I was with a small group of 5 of us, Lemon and I and a few friends that I've done these minor interactions with. And we went and climbed my first ever 14er. So we went and climbed a mountain here in Colorado. And essentially a 14er means it's over 14,000 feet in elevation at the top of the peak. And so for those, following along, essentially that's 4,200 meters high, 4,260 meters or more in elevation overall. And the challenge of that, because then I think Colorado has some 50-something peaks that rise above 14,000 feet, but it's very consistent in that it's low oxygen, tends to be entirely different weather patterns and things like that. And so for me, it is a kind of a rite of passage in Colorado when you're experiencing the Rocky Mountains, going around doing things, to climb a 14er, to basically take the time to actually, the effort of walking trails. And in this case, because I went up Mount Bierstadt is the actual mountain I went up. And I forget what the actual top was of it, but it's a significant elevation. It's one of the what's considered easy 14ers to start with. And there's like 5 or 6 peaks that kind of match that, meaning you can drive to the trailhead pretty easily and then hike in from there. And this one has about 1.5 mile hike that's kind of flat-ish. You go down several hundred feet and then come back up several hundred feet before you start the actual climb up the mountain. And then from the base of the mountain to the peak, which is about a 3,000 plus foot climb, it takes place within 2 miles, essentially, that you climb, basically 3,000 some feet. And
that's crazy. That's very steep.
So it becomes a significant effort, and it actually becomes a real climb towards the end. They call it a scramble because the trail ends right about 13,000 feet. And so the last 1,000 feet that you have to climb is jumping across or kind of stepping across rocks, just open rocks here and there that are close enough together to make your way through, but there is no defined trail at that point. And so you're just kind of rock climbing to a degree without needing ropes or stuff, and parts, hands and feet, climbing up these rocks to get to the peak, to actually get up there. And so they call it a scramble when you do that. But that was a heck of a lot of effort. I'm excited because as I've been doing, I continue, and we've both advocated, I think, trying to be physically active in whatever forms you can. And so for me, this was a step up, and my first stage of going into a Coloradan tradition where it only took me 22 years to do one, to actually climb a 14er. And I have it on my plan to hopefully hit more of these peaks throughout the year. I have no current goal or plan to hit all 50 some peaks. That's a lot. And some of them are legit hard, dangerous climbs, where if you're up there when the clouds roll in, you could be struck by lightning. Actually, that's true of all of them. And where we were, I was surprised because in Denver and where I'm at, it started driving up at being basically a day where it hit 90 degrees during the day. And it's been that way recently, in like good solid summer days. The base of the trail was about 60 degrees. And the top of the mountain was essentially about just over freezing, was about like 40 degrees. So it lost like 20 degrees temp going up the mountain, as well as wind blowing and things like that. So it was an interesting, significant experience. I am proud of myself for finishing, to the degree of like, I will admit I had elation at the top of the mountain when we were finished, where I was able to stand up there and almost had like a giddy kind of reaction to being at the top of the mountain. That I was up there just like, whoa, that was a thing, and we did that. That is really cool.
Dude, that's a big accomplishment. Well done. That's something that you can look back on and remember.
So yeah, and hopefully it sticks, right? I mean, it was a good time. And so I will share, let's see, because I have some gallery up here. Just since I have it there to share, I will show like, here is a map of the actual like mountain peak, stuff like that. Not a big deal.